My dog suddenly just laid on his side and was twitching and cramping up, completely unresponsive. In moments like these, most owners only have one thought. What is happening right now? Is this poisoning? Hi, I'm Francesca, a veterinarian specialized in acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. And situations like this are something I see again and again in practice. And often it's not what owners first expect. It's something that surprises many. An epileptic seizure. When it comes to epilepsy, there are two things that often surprises pet owners. First, even with well-adjusted medication, seizures can still occur from time to time. Second, the medication itself can cause significant side effects like fatigue and apathy, sometimes to a considerable extent. And this is where real dilemma often arises in practice. On one hand, you want to control the seizures. On the other hand, you want to preserve the animal's quality of life. Is the dog still able to just be a dog? Well, I recently had a case like this in practice. Let's call him Joko. From a medical standpoint, everything was done correctly at first. Joko was diagnosed with epilepsy and received the appropriate medication. But despite that, he continued to have occasional seizures. So the logical next step was increasing the medical dose. However, instead of improving, a new problem appeared. Joko started alternating between extreme fatigue and inner restlessness. At times, he seemed completely exhausted, almost knocked out, and then in other moments, he would wander around restlessly and disoriented and even bump into objects. It sometimes seemed like he was barely aware of his surroundings. At that point, it became clear. Increasing the epilepsy medication further was not the solution for Joko, right? And this is exactly where traditional Chinese medicine, also called TCM, comes into play. Because TCM doesn't just look at the diagnosis epilepsy. Instead, it asks a different crucial question. What is the underlying cause and how is it affecting the body? In Joko's case, there are several possible causes for epileptic seizures. These include, for example, diseases of organs like the liver or kidney, toxins, head trauma, low blood sugar, inflammation in the brain, or even brain tumors, just to name a few. And even after thorough diagnostics, sometimes the exact cause remains unclear. This is where TCM takes things a step further. It asks which factors might be disturbing the body's balance, even if they are difficult to measure with conventional medicine. Because in TCM, so-called trigger factors are also considered, such as emotional stress or weather conditions. Interestingly, though, these connections are increasingly being explored in modern veterinary medicine as well. From a TCM perspective, these influences can create or worsen internal imbalances, so-called disbalances, which may manifest as seizures. The goal of TCM is not just to suppress symptoms, but to recognize and regulate these imbalances before they escalate. To put it simply, you can imagine these imbalances like a pan filled with milk sitting on a hot stove. At first, the milk starts to gently move and bubble. That would be the beginning of an imbalance. If the heat continues, the reaction becomes stronger until eventually the milk boils over, right? And that boiling over could be compared to a seizure. So the question becomes quite obvious. Wouldn't it make more sense to either remove the pan from the heat in time or reduce the temperature before it escalates? Back to Joko. In his case, it became very clear that his seizures often occurred in stressful situations, and that's exactly where treatment begins. With this knowledge, we can actively try to reduce stressors and stabilize the animal's system. So, how is this implemented in TCM? Usually through three main pillars. First, acupuncture. Second, nutritional therapy. And third, individually tailored herbal formulas. And in Joko's case, special attention was also paid to identify and minimizing stress triggers in everyday life. But what happened next? Now, something very important. Joko's epilepsy medication was never simply stopped. And in general, you should never abruptly stop epilepsy medication. Why? Because it can lead to something called status epilepticus, a seizure that doesn't stop on its own. This is a life-threatening emergency and can be fatal. So the goal was never to replace the medication. The goal was to complement it. The treatment plan for Joko looked like this. First, stabilize him and prevent breakthrough seizures. That means he continued his conventional medication while being supported with TCM to improve overall stability. And secondly, only once his condition gradually improves can medication be very carefully reduced, but always under veterinary supervision. How much medication can be reduced or whether it should be reduced at all is highly individual. In some cases, dogs can later be managed primarily or only with TCM. But that's not always the case. But one other thing is very crucial, and this was also true for Joko. Epilepsy usually doesn't just disappear. That means no matter the therapy, it should never be stopped abruptly. Otherwise, there is always the risk of a severe seizure, that status epilepticus we already talked about. And even though Joko is just one example, it perfectly shows what this really is about. It's not just about suppressing seizures, but understanding what's happening inside the body and in the animal's daily life. Because often the biggest change happens when owners start recognizing what throws their dog out of balance. And that understanding and the responding appropriately can already make a huge difference. For many owners, especially with supportive TCM therapy, this brings back a sense of control and confidence in managing their pet's condition. But I also want to emphasize something important. Every animal is unique, and these approaches do not replace necessary conventional medical treatment. That's why epilepsy should always be managed under veterinary supervision. And this is a point that Francesca also wants to make. So hold on. Francesca, come here. Just talk about it once more. And before you go, I have something very important to say to you. If you have an animal at home that is suffering from a disease, please don't just rely on these kind of videos, because they are just for educational purposes only. If you have an animal at home that is suffering from a disease, please take it to a vet, that the vet can have a look on it and diagnose it accordingly. It is very important that your animal gets a treatment plan especially designed for its disease. My conclusion when it comes to epilepsy cases is this. My goal is not to take animals off conventional medication at all costs, because that can be very dangerous. The more important question is which therapies or which combinations of therapies help control epilepsy as effectively as possible, so the animal has as few seizures as possible and can still live a normal, happy life. The goal is stability and quality of life. How this is achieved should always be decided individually and under professional guidance. So I strongly recommend consulting a qualified veterinarian. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have a pet with epilepsy? What has helped in your case? Or have you already tried or had experience in TCM? So feel free to share your story in the comments. And also, if this video was helpful, give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss any further videos. And that's it for today. So see you next time. Bye!